Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, Steve A's, and that's talent on loan from Kolob. My crew, we ruminate every single week on the great and spacious beehive. So thanks so much for joining us to discuss the contemporary events in Mormonism. We have a big week coming right at you. This is episode 105, and it's February 4th, 2024. We have a rare transgender baptism that has been approved. We're going to talk to you about that. An LDS Church leader, a senior one, has been charged for not reporting child sex abuse and rape allegations. This is unbelievable. And an LDS Church faces yet another lawsuit on tithing misuse. You're not going to want to miss it. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm at www.mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can send me an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. I'd like to invite onto the program my fabulous co-host, Rebecca Biblioteca. Rebecca, how you doing?
I am great this morning. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. A special surprise, Rebecca. We have a special, an additional co-host here, Dr. Jana Reiss. Jana, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. It's good to see you both. Hello.
Wonderful. Is it okay if we call you Jana?
Absolutely.
Who are you and what are you all about?
I'm a senior columnist for Religion News Service, and I also write books. Most recently, The Next Mormons, How Millennials Are Changing the LDS Church. And then my research partner and I are working on a new one about secularization and people who leave the church.
And what is your 60-second Mormon story? How did you come into the world of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
So 30 years ago, I converted to the LDS Church, and I have written about that recently for RNS. Basically, I was baptized the same month as the September 6th, so September of 1993, which was perhaps not a very auspicious time to be baptized, to be joining a religious movement that was excommunicating people a lot like me. But I've been happy and I've never regretted that decision.
That's excellent. I have to say, Jana, that I have your book on the shelf right here behind me. I run the Good Book Club, and we read it a couple years ago, and it was wonderful. We had an amazing discussion. And I remember talking with you. I think we emailed back and forth a little bit, and you answered some follow-up questions for some of our book club members. And we were really, really looking forward to your next one that you were talking about. Can you tell us a little more about that? That sounds really interesting.
Thank you. I hope it will be very interesting. We've had a long odyssey this time in collecting our data. It has taken 2 years. Last time it took about 6 weeks. So that's its own story about the perils of data collection for very tiny populations, micro population. So it's been a long haul. Now we are getting set to analyze the 2 sets of data that we have, and that's going to be writing the book this year. I'm hiring graduate students, which is really exciting to finally be at this point. I know that some of our donors were kind of wondering, why is this all taking so long, and why have we not heard from you?
Broadly speaking, Jana, how do you feel about the current state of coverage of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
It's fascinating to me that it continues to be such a point of interest for people who are not really connected to the LDS Church. For example, in 2022, when the Joseph Smith daguerreotype was in the news, that was our #1 story at Religion News Service for the entire year, not just for Mormon stories, but for all religion stories. So that's fascinating to me. I don't know why people are so interested in this. Mormonism is a very small religion compared to others in the United States, but there is an enduring fascination. In terms of coverage, I'm wondering, do you mean, is it balanced? Is that what you're asking?
Just generally speaking, is it balanced coverage? How is the world looking at the contemporary events of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? How is it being covered both within the church and without the church broadly?
What I see in the media landscape is the same thing that I see in the media landscape more broadly, which is a lot of polarization and a lot of niching of the segments of the market. So what we have in media broadly defined is the rise of a lot of podcasts that are narrowcasts, essentially, instead of broadcast media. People are gravitating toward sources that will provide them with their essentially confirming the views that they already have. That is troubling in the long term in terms of our ability to talk to one another in ways that are both respectful and informative. We have moved into a new era where really we can all hang out a shingle and claim that we're an expert in something. And so with Mormonism in particular, because people are so invested emotionally and in terms of their life experience, sometimes these discussions, as I'm sure you've seen, having entered this sphere, sometimes these discussions can get pretty heated in ways that are not great.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. No, I always read whatever you write. I think it's wonderful. And I think it is always
Wow.
balanced. And I find it just, you have a very interesting take on different things. One article that you wrote, I think it was last year, was the one about tithing and how to look at tithing. That was such a big issue, continues to be such a big issue. I guess I might have a question, because that was pretty, I thought that was pretty vulnerable kind of to put out just your thoughts on that and maybe a new way to look at paying LDS tithing. What was behind your decision to even write that article and put that out there? I know people are still talking about that article.
Well, thank you for reading. I don't normally write about my own life. So I mentioned one that I wrote about my own life last year, and then you've mentioned another one. I felt very blindsided by the revelation at the end of 2018 about the LDS Church hoarding so much wealth. For me, that was quite a turning point in my own journey with the institutional church. I would not say my faith journey, because my relationship with God has not been in any way damaged by that revelation. But I would say that my trust of the institutional church took a hit. I thought about it for a while. Then when I did write about it, I decided to just be transparent and public about it, which is what the church was not doing about its finances. I stated publicly that I was going to be paying my tithing to charitable organizations that would provide an accounting of where their money is spent, and that I would be privileging charities that are essentially about taking care of children and educating people. Those are a couple of my major issues. So I now donate my money to organizations that very directly improve the lives of children. I would say, in the interest of balance, that since the church has taken such a shellacking in the media and from some of its own members about its finances, that the church has made a lot of attempts in the last couple of years to give more to charity, to emphasize the work that it does through its humanitarian division. It's not enough still for me to win back my trust of this organization, but maybe it will be a good thing going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Jana, for your vulnerability and for coming on the Mormon News Roundup. We greatly appreciate that. And we're going to jump into the news this week, and we're going to start right off with your piece here that was that you put out by Religion News Service, and that was also picked up by the Salt Lake Tribune, and it's called "A Latter-day Saint Faith: Beyond a Performance Checklist." What did you write this week, and what is the takeaway from this article?
Well, so that is actually an author interview. I love to interview authors. It's one of my favorite parts of this job. And the book is Thomas McConkey's book, At-One-Ment. Basically, he is a meditation teacher. Now he's a student at Harvard Divinity School. So I guess he's living in the Cambridge area at the moment. But he has written a couple of books that I really liked about Mormon faith transitions. So I was excited to read this one as well. And I think it's a very important statement about how to have a fuller relationship with divinity, how to have a more embodied spiritual practice. One of the things that he points out in the book again and again is that Mormonism sort of inherited this hatred of the body from Christianity, and it doesn't necessarily sit well with our theology, because our theology is very pro-body, but as our practice hasn't quite sunk in with a lot of us. So as a meditation teacher, he's very interested in embodied spiritual practice.
Oh, Thomas McConkey is amazing. And I know that my husband was attending some of his lower light meditation groups and things like that. And he's so important in just kind of tapping into that more alternative spiritual side. Do you think that there is a need for that in the LDS community? Are people seeking something different. I mean, that was kind of why my husband started attending. He just needed just something a little different, just to look at something else. Do you find that there is this need to seek a little something more, or a different way to access divinity, spirituality?
I do think so. I think a lot of people are hungering. Certainly the notes, the letters, emails that I receive, the ones that aren't really angry with me, but the ones who just write to say, I'm in the church, but I feel maybe a bit unfulfilled, or it feels like I'm not growing necessarily in the same ways. So the piece was titled Beyond the Performance Checklist or something like that, because one of the points that he's making in the book is that we have really perfected perfectionism. We have this idea of these are the things that you have to do in order to be a good Latter-day Saint. And he said, what if we still think behavior is important, how we treat other people is important, how we respond to God is important, but we are loved already. We are valuable already. We are already worthy. We're not climbing on some ladder to try to make ourselves worthy before God. What happens in your spiritual life, and what changes if you assume already at the beginning that you're okay?
The title of the article is really interesting because it says that we need to move beyond a checklist. And I think that a lot of people in the church can kind of get caught up with trying to check the boxes, going on a mission, getting the special calling, getting married in the temple, having a bunch of kids, getting an education degree. And those things can kind of become more of the focus of the faith than anything that is beyond yourself, or trying to really establish deep connections with yourself, with others, or perhaps even with the divine. And I think what your article really brings out is that if you reduce Mormonism down to just just basically like a bingo card, that if you fill out your bingo card appropriately, then you get into heaven, that it really robs people of the more treasured part of the faith. Is there any last thoughts on this, on your article, Jana or Rebecca, with regards to this week's featured news article?
Well, I just really appreciate it, because I do feel that although I've stepped away from the church, the busy work was something that did just keep you going constantly. And there was often not a time to stop and think, why am I doing this? What am I trying to gain from this? And I think a lot of people find themselves, they make the comparison to the hamster wheel, right? When you're in something that's a little more high demand, I think is how it's often described. So I love that this is even being brought up, so that maybe people can just take pause for a minute and do some self-care as far as looking at their own spirituality and really assessing what they might need or what they might want to get out of any religion, not only just the LDS Church. So
our next article here is from the Deseret News. We sent out 80,000 postcards to Latter-day Saints in the United States, and here's what we learned. It's our representative survey found a high percentage of self-identifying members agreeing with church teachings on historical questions and sexuality. And Jana, I know that you and Benjamin Knoll, teamed up together a short time ago to do something similar. So what did you find, and how did that compare with what was released this week in the Deseret News?
Well, I'm very excited about this survey. I have been in touch with Joshua Coates, who spearheaded this effort, along with Stephen Cranny, who has a lot of good experience with data collection and data analysis. So these are qualified people who are doing the best possible job that they can in collecting data on this population, which as I said, is hard to reach. And what they've done, I think, is pretty innovative, because they're returning to a surveying technique of the past, which was to use the phone book, blanket household, send letters, send postcards, and then see what your response rate is. And so they sent out 80,000. I think they received maybe 6,000 back, of which they validated about 3,800. I'd have to check those numbers again. About a third of them were from people who'd left the church, and maybe 2/3 from people who are still members of the church. And so they're going to be rolling out these revelations about what was in the data over the next months and maybe year. So this is great. This is so exciting. Anytime we can get data that has been reliably collected, that isn't just a snowball sample. A snowball sample is where you post something on Facebook and say, hey, send this to all your friends. Well, all that does is reinforce whatever biases are in your particular friend group. And so that's not a reliable statistical method. And so anytime you can have the very expensive way to do this, which is what they've done, to try to get as random a sample as you possibly can, that's great news for all of us who research this population.
Yeah, what they did is they sent out those 80,000 postcards to populations, mostly in the Western United States, that had LDS populations of at least 15% based on the census, the last census data. And what they got back was they validated 3,800 valid response, and it was a pretty rigorous methodology. And what they basically found is about 71% of those respondents identified as Latter-day Saints and attend church weekly, 65% outside of that area of the state attend weekly. And those results are basically very similar to the 2022 cooperative election study. So what I gained from this particular article is that it doesn't seem like in these particular strongholds of LDS population that rates are significantly decreasing. It seems like this is a win for the church. And if you actually think about it, the church is not going to publish something, I don't think, in the Deseret News that isn't going to be a win for it. So I think that this is a good news article for the church. What do you think, Rebecca?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd be curious to ask Jana what she thinks about the particular questions that they chose to ask, because you're right, that is a huge expense. You have one shot to send out this postcard. So I'm sure they spent time, and maybe you know something about this, really carefully crafting, the questions, what they wanted to find out.
You find out as you are crafting survey questions, all of your own biases, that are implicit. Other people who are, looking at your survey questions say, why did you word it in this way? And then you ask yourself, why did I word it in this way? So there's no such thing as a completely objective questionnaire that human beings can devise. Let's give everybody a little bit of grace in how hard it is to create a survey. I'm certainly a lot more full of grace and forgiveness now, having done it and having realized my mistakes, or some of them, than I was before I started. And I thought, oh, that looks pretty easy. All you have to do is write up some questions and send them out to people. It's not actually easy work. Well, I haven't seen the actual questionnaire, and I'm hoping to interview them for Religion News Service at some point soon. But my understanding is that this is a very broad survey about religious faith and religious practice. So belief and practice, and maybe a bit less so about political beliefs and behaviors that other surveys have captured pretty well. So we have a lot of good information about Latter-day Saints and their political views from many other surveys, including the CES that you mentioned. So it's great. It's just the more information that we have about, more benchmarks that we have about statistical analysis for Latter-day Saints. And I'm especially excited about former Latter-day Saints, because that is the population about which very little is known statistically. We know a lot in terms of the ones who are active on social media and the infrastructure that exists now to sort of welcome people who have left the church. That infrastructure did not exist decades ago. But that's not necessarily representative of this population as a whole. And in fact, I did write a post a couple of years ago about some of those pretty major differences educationally, racially, and geographically.
We'll be looking forward to seeing more of the results of this. So far, I think it is a bright spot for the church. I think it is good news from the church, which is a par for the course when something appears in the Deseret News. So we'll be interested to see what else comes out on this. A couple of other articles that came out this week here is a rare LDS transgender baptism was approved. And I want to play this clip here from Analyzing Mormonism over at Julia, and she's going to give a basic summarization of what we saw this week and why it's causing so much controversy.
2022, a woman named Lauren Harigian was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Lauren is in her early 30s, and she was a college athlete doing cross-country and track. She got her bachelor's degree from New Mexico State and her master's degree in counseling from Phoenix, Arizona. Lauren is also a transgender woman. After transitioning, Lauren sent a referral for herself to be taught by the missionaries. Sister missionaries taught her and integrated her into the ward. Lauren said that her ward members were affirming and safe, and that because of this full acceptance of who she was, she wanted to join the church.
Why I love this church so much is because no one has ever, with all the bishops I met with, through all the people I met with at church, has ever misused pronouns or my name around them.
After Lauren met with the mission president, he wrote a letter to the first presidency of the church explaining that she was a transgender woman who wanted to be baptized. And 4 months later, the first presidency sent the mission president a letter saying that yes, Lauren could be baptized. It's my understanding that while Lauren has been baptized, she's not allowed to attend the temple. My question is the church coming to more fully accept LGBTQ plus individuals? And Lauren, if you're out there, I'm proud of you.
Jana, can I start with you? This seems to be a somewhat of a rare occurrence to have the approval for the baptism of a transgender individual. Is this a rare occurrence? Do you think that this is going to happen more often? What are your initial thoughts on this rare occurrence?
I think that's a great question. And this is very encouraging to see. The church, not that long ago, revised the handbook and included some information about transgender members of the church. So in the section on temple recommends, who can have a temple recommend, who is not going to have a temple recommend, there is now a part about this for transgender individuals. So the one right after it is members who have committed a serious sin. So if you look at the wording here, it is interesting, and I would say a little bit surprising. And then it specifies that temple ordinances are received according to a person's biological sex at birth. So in general, the church's policy now appears to be very similar in some ways to the policy for members who are gay or lesbian, which is you cannot have a relationship. In this case, it's you can't have surgery, you cannot dress in the manner of the gender to which you feel you belong. You certainly can't have, this baptism case, is that this is someone who has already transitioned successfully and seems to be thriving, and that the church has welcomed that with baptism is interesting. Now, I doubt that this person would be allowed to have a temple recommend according to the church's own standards now, or in some ways a calling. It says that some callings are forbidden. It doesn't specify in the general handbook which ones those are.
Rebecca, I can let's take it to you, because my understanding is that this is only the first transgender baptism maybe in the last decade, or one or two in the last 10 years. Let me just play this for you and get your reaction, as the fact that this is a really, really rare event.
Mormon Church First Presidency approved transgender baptism that I'm aware of. Yeah. So this is the second. I was aware of one a few years back. But this means that even though Russell M. Nelson, Alan H. Oakes, and Henry B. Eyring express doctrine and theology and concern about gender transitioning and or same-sex marriage, they are approving the baptism of transgender individuals.
It's pretty cool, right, that this is happening, and it's even cooler that it's being highlighted by both sides of Mormonism, right, the conservative side and also the progressive side. But if you put yourself on their shoes, the doctrine of baptism is that all your sins are forgiven when you get baptized, and you believe that social or any kind of transition is sinful, those sins would have to go away, right? So it's a hard position to be in, where the First Presidency have to decide these cases, but at the end they're choosing to let these people join the church. I think it's pretty impressive.
Does this signify that the church is really, I mean, all these events, does it signify whether it's Sherinian, Charlie Bird and Ryan's acceptance, the baptism of trans people? Are we seeing a turning point in Mormonism where the Mormon Church is making significant strides in 2024 to embrace and accept LGBTQ individuals?
Can you answer John's question? Does this signify something larger, or is this just a one-off and maybe just a rare exception?
Oh, we are all podcasting like crazy trying to answer this question. I have been on multiple podcasts, both with conservative Mormons like Jacob Hansen and Greg Mattson, and then, of course, discussing this on my own podcast, Mormonish, and on Mormon Stories. So this transgender baptism and the other events that John detailed, the new church spokesman who's an ally, and learning more about Charlie Bird and his husband and his acceptance in his ward and having a calling. It is really, most of the podcasts that we all do say things like mixed messages or confusion, because this opens up this whole arena that people thought they had a very set of instructions on either side, more conservative and more progressive Mormons. But they don't, because these events are happening and everyone's trying to say, I don't understand. I believed it was this way. And in all my podcasting, I pointed, like Jana, everybody to the handbook. People are not necessarily aware of what's in the handbook. And that really is, and we've been told this from the stand, where the doctrine is. And so Jana's absolutely right. There are changes made in the handbook that aren't necessarily trickling down to the normal membership, both progressive and conservative. So it clearly says there are instructions of inclusivity, of letting people attend, hold callings. In my opinion, it is changing. It is going the other direction, but I know that causes concern for perhaps people that are more orthodox and conservative. So it's a wait and see, but I will say things are happening. That sounds very vague, but things are definitely happening and everyone is taking note and talking about it.
Yeah, Jana, I got a conservative member of the church's reaction because this is causing a rift within the church that has really been bubbling up here for quite a while. And this is Jacob Hansen, who was referenced earlier from a Thoughtful Faith podcast. He says, point one, a person who socially transitions is lying about their gender. Point two, a person who has not repented of their lies should not be baptized. Hence, conclusion, a person who socially transitions should not be baptized until they repent. So what we get from Jacob Hansen and several other people is the fact that this is causing a serious division in the church. In fact, some people are threatening to leave the church over this particular issue. It's just a very polarizing subject. What is the wider aspect of this? What can we take away from this incredibly rare event? And what should we think about the church going forward with regards to LGBTQ and transgender issues?
Well, I don't agree with what Jacob Hansen has said there about a transgender person being baptized. I think it's great that a transgender person has been baptized. And I think that demonstrates more of a church that I would like to be part of. I am an active member of the church, but sometimes it drives me crazy, which I write about. This idea that we have to be perfect before we're baptized. First of all, just that's problematic theologically in and of itself. And also, of course, the idea that somehow being trans is less than whole or less than godly or less than perfect in God's eyes is problematic as well. I mean, I understand that people have a hard time accepting change in some ways, and that's understandable for all of us. I'm 54 years old now, and sometimes I look around and I see some of the changes that have happened in my world, and I'm not pleased with all of them. Honestly, not about this, more about like kids being coddled and not having independence. Because when I was growing up, we were like the Stranger Things kids biking all over town and taking our lumps and playing Dungeons and Dragons. I really miss that. I read a story about a family where the parents had a police officer come knock on the door because their 9-year-old was riding a bicycle in their own neighborhood. That's not a good change in our society. So it's not like I'm on board with everything that's happening, but gosh, I'm on board with this one.
And this isn't the only LGBTQ issue that was brought up this week. The Red Cliffs Temple in southern Utah, the second temple in St. George, which is near my boyhood home. I have a special place in my heart for that area. They've had the open house. They haven't dedicated it yet. This was tweeted out here by Mr. Charlie Bird and Ben Shalati, who are probably the most prominent openly gay members of the church who are still in good standing, who are still faith-affirming members. And they talked about how they went through the Red Cliffs Temple, and I thought it was an interesting tweet. And it says, today was a beautiful day in Washington, Utah. We were invited by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to a private tour of the new Red Cliffs Temple, guided by a church authority and specifically for LGBTQ members, leaders, and allies. There were very tender conversations had as we listened to each other experiences with open hearts. 8 hours in the car with Mr. Charlie Bird and Ben Shalati was icing. We see the church really sending unusual signals here in that we're seeing a transgender baptism that's been approved. We're seeing members of the church here, Mr. Charlie Bird and Ben Shalati, who are openly gay members of the church, who are, to my understanding, are still in good standing in the church, who are specifically being invited to these open house events, kind of like an influencers only. So it's a special invitation. They just didn't wander up and go through an open house like maybe some of the rest of us. We're seeing something really different this week as far as LDS culture is concerned with these issues. What is your take on what's happening here, Jana?
I think it's very good news. I'm certainly pleased to see that the church is making strides. It is trying to make amends for a very tortured past with the LGBT community. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done, but I think that this is wonderful to see.
I just want to share one other kind of tongue-in-cheek tweet that I saw about this with you, Rebecca, and that's this one here. It says, visit the new Red Cliffs Temple at St. George. It's white and delightsome. Like I said, I grew up in St. George, and there's something about the very large structures of an LDS temple that are very stark in contrast to the surrounding areas. And obviously, this is a joke picture, but there's something special about that area. And when you put in these massive structures that are basically eternal and never go away, some people really take issue with the special character of some of these places like Heber Valley, like Cody, Wyoming, and like St. George. We have 2 temples in St. George.
I was down in St. George, I'm trying to think, a couple months ago, and I only follow the Cody, Wyoming, and the Heber Valley temples, right? I podcast on those extensively. So I wasn't even thinking about the Red Cliffs Temple. We're driving down the road, and suddenly, you can't even describe how huge this temple is. There it was. You cannot not see it from anywhere in town. So I believe that was the intent. It's everywhere, looming over the entire community. And some people love that. That's amazing. Other people find that intrusive and a little concerning. But as far as the actual event itself of having a very special tour for LGBTQ faithful members of the church, I've said this before in many of my podcasts, these events that are happening, some people in the church say, that's not my church. Other people say, I hope that's where my church is going. And you find yourself looking for signals that tell you, which direction is it going? This event, this open house, definitely gives hope to people that eventually, why would you invite someone to go through the temple if eventually you weren't ever going to be able to go through, like actually attend the temple? So a lot of people see this as a sign that the church will eventually let people who are LGBTQ actually attend the temple. The same with a baptism. What is the goal of being baptized? Eventually to attend the temple. So all these things are in place where the natural end result would be being able to go through the temple yourself. So that's how people who look at it, hoping that this is where the church is going, this is how they see these signs, these things that are happening. Others say, that's not my church. I don't know why they're doing this. I don't know what is happening. And some of them, as you said, say, I might have to rethink my membership. So, and again, I will say, perhaps from the top, you don't have any solid statement, but you have all these little, I call them breadcrumbs, that are being left that make one believe this is the direction that it's going. I hope it's the direction that it's going.
Yeah, Jana, can we give you the last word on the entire transgender baptism, on the LGBTQ special invitation at the St. George Temple? Do you think that we're going to see something in a wider, are we seeing policy changes that are coming from top down? What are you seeing? What are we going to see in the near term on these particular issues?
I can't tell you what we're going to see in the near term. I've been surprised too many times by the church to make prognostications like that. But in general, I think Rebecca is right that we are seeing these breadcrumbs that are leading somewhere. Right now, we're in a situation where we are celebrating the fact that LGBTQ members of the church have been invited in the temple on this special tour. But the reality still is that they are probably not going to be allowed to have a temple recommend if they are in a same-sex relationship, for example. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think we are in a better place than we were just a few years ago, but it could take a very, very long time.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, both of you, on that. And our next article here is really a thunderbolt here. And this was unbelievable when I saw this week, and it really went viral. It's a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania lobbyist who is also a senior LDS Church leader, has been charged for not reporting child rape allegations. This is really unbelievable. I have a video that goes along with this. Let me play this for you. And we'll start first with Jana to get your reaction.
Leader of the LDS Church for not reporting an alleged child sexual assault by another church leader. Here's Seth Kaplan.
Today, we're announcing charges against Rhett Hinsey. He is accused of failing to report as mandated as his position in the church.
State police say Hinsey is 50 years old, lives in New Cumberland, and is what's called Harrisburg's stake president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, overseeing church wards, including the one in Lebanon, where Sean Gooden was a leader until he was arrested in Virginia and then in Pennsylvania for allegedly sexually assaulting children. Between 1997 and 2000, who were between 8 and 12 years old when the alleged assaults happened.
But in the meantime, Mr. Hinsey became aware of what happened.
Police say, in October 2020, almost 2 years before Gooden was first arrested in Virginia, but didn't report the allegations. Hinsey is charged under this mandated reporter law for failing to report or refer what he knew. State police say Hinsey is a mandated reporter under the law.
The law was strengthened in 2014
after the Penn State Jerry Sandusky child sex assault scandal.
There's a whole host of positions responsible for the care of individuals, namely children, that are mandated by law to report allegations of child abuse that they become aware of. And Mr. Hinsey failed to do that.
Lieutenant Adam Reed says mandated reporters often report possible abuse through Childline, which relays the reports to the right law enforcement agencies. Hinsey is charged with a third-degree felony, punishable by up to 7 years in prison. But if you don't know if you're a mandated reporter, or if you know about something you're required to report,
when in doubt, certainly play it safe. I mean, I think it's just a good rule of thumb. If you become aware of any kind of serious crimes, especially when someone is in danger, to simply report it to law enforcement.
And that was our Seth Kaplan reporting. Now, tonight, Hinsey's lawyer provided a statement from the church. It says, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints works to actively prevent abuse. Our hearts ache for victims of abuse, and the church is committed to addressing such incidents wherever they are found. The church trains its leaders and supports their lawful efforts. The charges now brought by local prosecutors for failing to report the abuse are misguided, and the church will vigorously defend him. Hinsey is also chief operating officer at the Harrisburg-based Bravo Group, a government relations and communications firm. The firm tells us he is now on leave.
Okay, so Jana, this is one of the first times that we've seen, at least that I've seen, I haven't been in this space near for a fraction of what you have, of seeing a senior church leader who's been charged with not reporting child sex abuse. This is a very rare occurrence. What are your initial thoughts on this one?
This is going to be not the first for very long, is my initial thought. We are going to see more of these cases where the LDS Church has failed to report abuse that a leader knew about. What's perhaps mitigating about this particular case is the fact that this was abuse that happened 23 years ago. If you look at the Deseret News coverage of this story, that is in the very opening line, I think, of the coverage. So the question then is, does this make a difference? When a leader of the church is hearing about abuse 2 decades after the fact, does that make a difference in terms of mandated reporting? I am not a legal expert on this, but it sounds to me like that might be the church's avenue of defense here. In general, though, the church has let people down again and again on this issue. And the reporting from the Associated Press in 2022, and then again last year, following up with more documentation of the ways that the church has not lived up to what it's saying in this statement, that it actively works to prevent abuse. In fact, sometimes it has actively worked to suppress the reporting of abuse. And the chickens are going to come home to roost on that.
Rebecca, my wife is a public school teacher, and I was a public school teacher for a long period of time. There are certain folks in certain states who are mandated reporters. If you're a physician, if you're a social worker, if you're a teacher, if you're a police officer, you're required by law to report child sex abuse if it comes to your attention. And Pennsylvania apparently has, I'm not a legal expert either, has somewhat of a strict policy when it comes to reporting child sex abuse. And a stake president, it does not have confidentiality, does not have priest penitent privilege. But if he has knowledge of child sex abuse that comes to his attention, regardless of when it is that it happened, he is supposed to take action. That did not happen in this case. And this stake president is now facing a single charge of not reporting child sex abuse. And that's really surprising. I've not seen something like this before.
Yeah, this is a very big story. It's very rare. I agree with Jana. It will not be rare now that this has happened. And did have that question, what about the statute of limitations? I know that Radio Free Mormon did a podcast about this the other day. Really good. And we had been talking about that. And he himself was sort of like, I'm not sure about that. dug in a little farther, and exactly what you said, yes, in Pennsylvania, the laws do support this kind of action against the stake president. And that's the problem. Every state has a different law. I believe that's why the leaders are encouraged and told to call the hotline. Unfortunately, and I'm talking about the church hotline that will tell them perhaps what their responsibilities are, whether they must report. Again, that seems crazy to me. Just report. I've podcasted a lot about that. In this case, the fact that the church is saying we will vigorously defend him, I believe, and others believe, that there may be some liability on their side as far as giving him advice that was not correct. Someone from another state advising, how you handle something legally across state lines. We may see something like that coming out of this. I think that's why they're going to so actively defend this. And I look at this almost like a test case. I'm sure there are other scenarios where church leaders were perhaps told incorrect information as far as reporting, or just on their own didn't do it quite right. It's very convoluted state to state, unless you just take the idea of saying, I'm just going to report it. What makes sense? Someone's being harmed, I will report. That doesn't seem to be the case here. So I think everyone's watching this. As you saw in the news story, it looks like he's been put on leave from his position. I mean, this is big. It really brings up the issue of liability of any church member in their calling. There are a lot of liabilities that leaders may not think about. And I think that is what is having a spotlight shown on it right now. I think we're going to see a lot more about this issue.
Yeah, Jana, from my reading of the article, it seems like Pennsylvania does have a priest penitent privilege law. It does have clergy privilege, meaning that if a bishop or a priest receives information about child sexual abuse that happens during a confessional setting, then that information can be privileged. But as we know, most times when stake presidents hear about child sex abuse, it is not in a confessional setting. They typically get that from a bishop who tells them about the incident. But that is not protected under Pennsylvania law. You have an obligation. You're a mandatory reporter in Pennsylvania for that information because it was not gleaned during the confessional setting in a one-on-one with the perpetrator. Hence, that's the reason that he was charged.
I want to say I'm not an expert on how the clergy penitent privilege law plays out in Pennsylvania. That is interpreted differently in different places. And so I can't say definitively whether that was privileged information or not. But one thing that I think we need to consider in this particular case is the geographical context in which it's taking place. Pennsylvania, along with Boston, was an epicenter in the Catholic sex abuse crisis and cover-up. And they are still untangling in Pennsylvania courts all of the ramifications of decades, essentially, of cover-up by the Catholic Church. They are going to have no patience whatsoever for any LDS attempts to do the same thing. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch, is how this state in particular that has been burned so very badly by institutional malfeasance in trying to protect itself rather than protect victims, how this will occur, how it will play out.
I said I was going to give you the last word. There was one other tweet that I wanted to bring out here, and this was from Jen Next Door, who says what the Mormon Church says versus what the Mormon Church does. So this is the official Harrisburg Stake Twitter account here that's tweeting out in August 5th, 2022. And it's saying that the church responds to a recent Associated Press article that you referenced earlier, Jana, about the church's abuse helpline. Quote, the abuse of any child or any other individual is inexcusable. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes this and teaches this and dedicates tremendous resources and efforts to prevent, report, and address abuse. Our hearts break for these children and victims of abuse. But it's at the same time that this stake president was already aware of this particularly horrific case. And we assume that this is the official stake Twitter account, which I would presume that the stake president would either directly control or might approve. I'm not sure about that. But we seem to be seeing in this Harrisburg stake two things happening at the same time. Oh, we take no tolerance for sexual abuse, and you're tweeting that out and saying that it's horrific, and we do everything that we can to stop it. And at the same time, he's not reporting it. It's just the hypocrisy in this particular case seems to be quite significant.
Well, I doubt that the stake president is the one actually actively managing the Twitter feed, or the X feed, I guess we're supposed to say now. It may not be a case of that individual person with the left hand and the right hand, but rather another person altogether. But your point still stands in any case. The church has, and the very same language that we saw in the statement from this week was also in that thing from last year, 2023? What you just showed?
The AP sex abuse was 2022, summer of 2022.
That was 2022. So the language is the same. Our hearts are breaking, right? That is the way that when people are trying to understand evil things, and they've been trained to think about evil as perpetrated by individuals rather than by systems, our hearts can break individually, but systemically, we're going to fight you all the way. We are not going to give an inch to try to change our system or to admit wrongdoing.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. So the Michael Resendez in the AP sex abuse case happened in the summer of 2022. And it was in that October that President Nelson gave his response to that after taking a 2-week hiatus off of Twitter probably because, in my opinion, of that particular case. Rebecca, I said I was going to give Jana the last words, but any last thoughts on this stake president being charged and now the church coming to his defense, going to be making sure that he does not face any accountability for not reporting? Presumably, again, there's a lot of presumptions here. We don't have all the information, but presumably the stake president called the helpline at the church headquarters, and presumably Kurt McConkie told him not to report. I don't know that for a certainty, but that's my assumption as to what's happened. What do you think? I mean, is this going to open up bishops to litigation? Is this going to open up stake presidents to litigation? Is this going to uncork an incredible can of worms here where members of the church are going to be sued left, right, and center for the sexual abuse and the reporting of it or the not reporting of it?
Yeah, I think exactly. Boy, you just said it for me, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And I know as RFM was looking into it and talking to me about it, there was some confusion on, the kind of reporting you were supposed to do on one site to another in Pennsylvania. So it's very easy to see how a lawyer, Kurt McConkie, could look one thing up and say, oh, it's this, but it really wasn't, and give some bad legal advice. We've heard that before. But again, I say this is such a cautionary tale to any kind of local leader or anybody in any position, that you really have to look at what you personally might be liable for. And you have to look at the idea, will the church have your back in this situation? And you don't know, people don't think like that, right? They just do things that they do in their callings and in supporting their ward. And you have to think like that. I have a cousin who was a bishop way before any of the ideas that maybe you shouldn't be alone with youth or parents should come in. And he flat out said, I'm not closing the door to my office when I have interviews. I don't want that liability. He was very forward thinking, 15 years ago. Before now, of course, that is the policy. So I think exactly what you said. This is going to open a Pandora's box that we probably can't even imagine. I think it's going to be heartbreaking in a lot of cases, because I think everyone is doing what they think they were supposed to do or had been advised to do by a church that they trusted. So it's going to be, I think, heartbreaking to watch maybe what might happen.
Yeah, and Jana, you brought up earlier Michael Resendez from who was made prominence from the floodlit and from shining the light on the Catholic Church's abuse back in, I believe it was the 1990s in the New England area. And as a result of him and these type of articles, we're seeing something else this week, and that's that in the Utah legislature, there's been a bill that's been introduced to repeal the so-called priest penitent privilege or clergy penitent privilege law, making it so that bishops and other priests of faith, whether you receive the information as a priest or not, that you are going to have to divulge, or you can divulge, any sexual abuse that comes to your attention as a LDS bishop, as a stake president, whether it's in a confessional setting or not. And I want to play this news article here, which is going to give a better summarization than I just gave about what the church is doing in Utah in its home court with regards to the priest penitent privilege law, which is the subject of so much controversy.
A pair of bills introduced in the Utah state legislature offer an olive branch to churches to persuade ecclesiastical leaders to report abuse.
I know a lot of the past efforts have been just an all-out removal of the exception and make them mandatory reporters. So this one's a little bit different.
I'm Ben Winslow on the Hill. The legislation is a deal being offered to churches, and the churches tell me they don't oppose it.
How do we protect this clergy exception, but at the same time carve out this exception when there's an exigency going on of child abuse and neglect?
Representative Anthony Loubet is proposing to give priests, bishops, or other ecclesiastical leaders the option to report abuse that is ongoing. In exchange,
if they do report, they do get liability, criminal liability protections. So it gives them the incentive to report in those situations because then they don't have to worry about litigation.
It's a break from previous legislation that sought to force reporting. Those faced significant pushback from faiths who argued it broke the seal of the confessional.
It allows different faiths to be able to determine how they want to handle it. The Catholic Church, part of their practice, the confessional is very sacred.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a powerful presence on Utah's Capitol Hill, tells Fox 13 News it does not oppose this bill. The Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City says it doesn't either, but it still has concerns about the possibility that the language could be changed to require priests to report such abuse. And if that were to become law, priests would face the untenable choice of breaking the law or being excommunicated, because breaking the seal of confession means automatic excommunication, a violation of the First Amendment.
That may get them into a lot of trouble in terms of being defrocked if you're a Catholic Church or being released if you're an LDS bishop. But there's no legal consequence to that.
Representative Brian King has a similar bill to offer ecclesiastical leaders legal protections if they choose to report abuse.
I want the law to specifically say you may report to law enforcement without it getting you in trouble with the law.
With two major faiths no longer standing in the way, the bills may now see a chance for passage.
If it means a bill is more likely to pass, whether it's in his name or my name, that provides greater protection for children and vulnerable adults who are being abused. That's the key.
Now look for those bills to start moving soon here in the Utah State Legislature.
Hey, so Jana, these same bills were introduced last year into Utah and they died in committee. And the rumor on the street is that the church behind the scenes threw a wet blanket on those bills. Now the church is removing its opposition to these bills. And I would say that you would be likely to see something like this get approved.
I can't speak to the history of this because I wasn't aware of any bills that were presented and then died in committee. So I can't shed any light on that past history, but I can speak to why now, I think, which is that we just saw with the Harrisburg case, an individual local church leader who is being held accountable for a decision, presumably a decision that was the result of advice given by the church. And so the church has every reason to not stand in the way of a law like this, because think of how it's worded. The local leader may report abuse and then be indemnified, essentially, not be held accountable, not be liable in court for that information. And that's the key, I think, for why the church would want to support a bill like this, or at least not stand in its way, which is that it will remove that sense of liability for local leaders.
And Rebecca, it's a big difference here in between what the church said, won't oppose. That's a big difference than we fully endorse. The church is once again walking a very fine line.
I would say saying I won't oppose is their full endorsement. That's kind of how they roll. But I went to the Capitol with a sign for some of those past bills. I even ended up getting my picture in the Washington Post. It was shocking. And so I know a lot of people care, and a lot of people have tried for a long time to get this message across. And now I think it takes something like the church realizing, oh, our own people are actually in danger, like the stake president situation, for them to say, all right, we won't stand in the way. But I can see the people are working very hard behind the scenes, trying to find some kind of a compromise. They're understanding the religious aspects of it. But the bottom line is we've got to find a way to make it possible and encourage people to protect the most vulnerable. And by saying I won't stand in the way, that is a pretty high endorsement from the church, because you're right, that's usually how they walk that line. So I'm hopeful that this will happen, and it will be a positive step for the vulnerable individuals that need to be protected, and for good church leaders who are just trying to do, what's necessary. And unfortunately, they may be asking for direction and guidance, from a hotline, a helpline that is not telling them something that's in their best interest, or even someone who's more vulnerable, their interest too. So hopefully positive steps.
Now, our next article here is, there's so much legal machination surrounding the church every week. It's, we live in a very litigious society for sure. And this one really got my attention as well. It's the LDS Church is facing a third lawsuit over alleged tithing misuse. Let me play this brief clip for you. And Jana, get your reaction to the church being sued once again for how it uses tithing.
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is facing another lawsuit over how it spends members' tithing money. This time it comes from a married couple in California. Gene and Michelle Judson say they've been members of the church for decades. They say $40,000 of their money was used to build the City Creek Center Mall in downtown Salt Lake City. Now, we've reached out to the church for comment, but we haven't heard back on this. This marks the third lawsuit filed against the church over funding for City Creek.
Jana, you mentioned earlier that you had some concerns about how the church was using your tithing donations, and it seems like you're not alone.
Well, I can tell you I'm in the extreme minority. I know this because one of the questions that we asked on the new version of the Next Mormon survey related to this, and very few Latter-day Saints are concerned about this in the United States. Let's not blow this out of proportion and claim that it's a majority of people, because it isn't. However, for those of us who are concerned about this, this is an interesting development. I doubt that this will be successful. Myself, I would be surprised if the class action lawsuit is successful to retrieve tithing money that was donated to the church in the past. But who knows? There are also a couple of other lawsuits that have been brought by individuals, most notably a member of the Huntsman family who is trying to get, I think it was $5 million of tithing money back. I'd have to check that figure. But so that is still a live question. What will happen with that lawsuit?
Yeah, and Rebecca, this was filed by Gene Judson and his wife, and I know that you know Gene very well, and so do I. I actually had him co-host an episode of the Mormon News Roundup not long ago, and I actually spoke to him before this article actually broke, so I do have some behind the scenes, and I know that you also have plenty of behind the scenes with Gene Judson and this lawsuit as well.
Yeah, this is kind of my fault. So everything's about me. No, I had seen that there was a class action in California, and I found the lawyers' names. I made a post on my different social media that I think it was my Good Book Club site that Gene follows, or perhaps my Mormonish Facebook page. Anyway, I said, hey, anybody in California want to get involved? I've gathered the information for you. Here are the details, and here's who you need to call and contact. And Gene did. And then they were chosen to be, it's not the lead couple, whatever you would call it, to have their name on the lawsuit. So it is very interesting. And there are rumblings of other states tagging on to this. I don't think we've seen the end of it. The whole idea, there have been lawsuits in the past, of course, but those were all based on sort of a religious ideology. The court would have to weigh in and say, yes, you were right. You were deceived by your beliefs or what the church was teaching. This is different. These lawsuits are begging the question of corporate fraud. And that's a whole different scenario that actually I think has more of a chance to be successful. So, and some of these class actions may be combining together. I also know several individuals that are planning their own suits, not part of a class action. So we've definitely not seen the end of this at all. It's only going to get bigger, I think.
Yeah, the basic sum up of the lawsuit is that the church made statements in particular in the early 2000s regarding the building of the so-called City Creek Mall, which is in Salt Lake City, saying that that mall would not be built with any tithing monies. And Jana, as you mentioned with the James Huntsman lawsuit, which was also filed in California, that the appeals court panel of 3 judges said that a reasonable juror could conclude that indeed that mall was built with approximately $1.4 billion worth of money. And it seems like the floodgate has really been opened by that ruling. Now, the church has appealed that to the full panel there in the Ninth Circuit in California. But once the smallest crack in the facade of possibly getting your tithing back, we're seeing a floodgate open. The stone has been cut out of the mountain on these tithing lawsuits, and they're starting to roll forth.
Yeah, I'm sure that we haven't seen the last of this. I think that this would be terrifying for the church, the prospect of people trying to retrieve their tithing money or calling attention again and again to the way that the church has possibly handled tithing money. The church has tried to state that the money that it has used to fund Ensign Peak Advisors, which is the investment fund that was the subject of all of the documentation that was released by the whistleblower at the end of 2018, the church has tried to state that none of that was current tithing money. But, the fund was built from the excess of previous years of tithing money. So to me, that feels like straining at gnats. That is not a particularly persuasive argument. And it wasn't just the City Creek Mall. That was one of them. But the other was Shoring Up Beneficial Life, which is an arm of the church, a for-profit, apparently, arm of the church with that donor fund, the Ensign Peak Advisor Fund.
If you want to get in touch with the Mormon News Roundup, we're on X, we're also on Twitter, we're on Instagram. We'd be very grateful to hear your thoughts on this tithing lawsuit. Is it possible that people will get their tithing back, especially persons who paid before the City Creek Mall? Because that's what really the class actions are all about. It's not about people who made recent donations to the church. It's all surrounding those statements by President Hinckley in particular, and also Bishop Budge at around that time regarding the slight delineation between invested reserves and tithing. And it appears that that particular delineation that the church wants to make in between those two terms, that there is a distinction without a difference. And that's the entire rub here. Let us know your thoughts by sending us a message over on Instagram or on YouTube. We'd be very grateful for that. Our next article here is one that you found, Rebecca, here. As the church is doing something with seminary here. What's going on with the church and seminary?
Yeah, they're always tweaking the seminary program, which I think is great because it means that they're, trying to assess the needs of the current students, because I believe that they do change. And in this case, instead of just religious instruction, which is what you think of with seminary, they are going to be implementing some lessons and some information just about life skills, and I think what they're doing in the church altogether, they do have these programs where they have, finances, learn more about finances, learn more about being more self-reliant, learn about just all these different things. I think they're putting this now into a package for the youth. And I think it's great. I think it's a great change, because why not take that time and help them learn life skills and things that are going to help them in addition to just their spirituality. So I thought it was a positive change. It certainly does still have a religious component to it, even as they go through these different life skills. And there is one quote in there where they say the ultimate goal, of course, through these life skill training is to increase spirituality and to make sure that the kids continue to be riveted to the words of the living prophets. So you definitely have the religious component, but within that, I think they are going to try to teach some more practical skills, which I think is excellent. And I think they see a need in the youth for this, or otherwise they wouldn't have made the change. So I think it's a good thing.
Let me play this for you, Jana, and get your reaction to what the church is doing with seminary. I do have 2 seminary-age students myself. This is from Jasmine over at Scripture Plus. I'm a big Jasmine fan. I like her channel because she gives you all of the information that you need in a short period of time, which conforms with my limited attention span. But she tweeted out here, the Latter-day Saint Seminary is shifting away from a scripture study curriculum. And instead, the church announced today that they're introducing a new set of life preparation lessons that will take up 1 to 2 days every week in the seminary curriculum. I do remember going to 4 years of seminary, and we studied the scriptures constantly during that. We did not have life preparation lessons, and my time in seminary really led me to developing a lifelong love of studying the scriptures.
Latter-day Saint Seminary is shifting away from a scripture study curriculum, at least a little bit. Today, the church announced that they're going to introduce a new set of life preparation lessons that's going to take up to 1 to 2 days every single week in the seminary curriculum. I think that's a pretty big shift, and of course, I have opinions. Typically, high school students attend seminary class 5 days a week, where they do a deep dive on a volume of scripture for an entire year, such as the Old Testament or the Book of Mormon, and it appears that now they're trying to give students a more well-rounded training for gospel living, not just a knowledge of the scriptures. These life preparation lessons are going to include things like mission prep, temple prep, scripture study skills, emotional resilience, life skills, and teachings of Latter-day Prophets. I'm not going to lie, you guys know me, I think studying scriptures at a deep level is super important, and I think in some ways we're decreasing our scriptural literacy at a church, so I do worry about that, and part of me is pained to move away from teaching the scriptures in a more immersive setting than just a limited Sunday school setting. But as much as I hate to admit it, I actually do think this is the right move. Today's social climate, super challenging, honestly fairly hostile to living the principles and standards of the gospel, and I think we could use more dedicated attention to preparing youth to develop these skills to be spiritually, emotionally, and mentally resilient against all of these life challenges. On top of that, I'm a huge fan of doing temple prep in high school. It's honestly overdue, so I'm thrilled to see that implemented across the board at a younger age. President Nelson's encouraged everyone over 18 to prepare to receive their temple endowment, so it's entirely appropriate to start start creating better systems to prepare youth for that. More and more young adults are serving mission, so providing earlier mission prep can only do good. And now that Come Follow Me has standardized a lot of scripture study across multiple places, Sunday school, family, etc., it's maybe a little less critical to get that same material covered in seminary. So this is getting rolled out in Release Time Seminary starting now and will be rolled out across the US and internationally later this summer. To learn more, read that article in the Church News.
I didn't hear anything about this until I saw this story in your show notes. And so I was fascinated by this. Rebecca, thanks for finding this story. Like Jasmine, I have kind of mixed feelings because I already sense that we're moving away from pretty serious scriptural literacy in the church, emphasis on really knowing the scriptures inside out and backwards, which to me was one of the reasons that I converted to this faith. I fell in love with the Book of Mormon and also with the dedication to daily scripture study and really wrestling with the text. So all of that is great. On the other hand, I also share the sense that this could be extremely useful for youth in the church. My research is about the United States in particular, so I can't really speak to Latter-day Saint youth abroad and some of the challenges that they face. But certainly what I do see among youth and young adults here in the United States is kind of a balkanization of their attention, maybe. They're fragmented, they are fractured in many ways. And hopefully something like this can help them think about how to integrate all of these various pieces of their lives, including the gospel, with daily life, and also provide them some life skills. You know, my calling before the calling that I have now was to be a stake self-reliance facilitator. So I was teaching some of the classes or a couple of the classes that were in the curriculum. And I think that program is terrific. So emphasizing some of those life skills for youth, teaching them about financial literacy earlier, because many of them aren't getting that at home and they're not getting it at school. It would be fantastic if they are getting it somewhere. So overall, I'd say this is probably a good change.
Yeah, thank you very much. That does take us to our final news article of the week, which is kind of one that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek article here. This is Hulu is lining up a new docu-series. You know, Hulu is famous for shining a light on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints here, and the title of this new series really got my attention. It's called The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. This is going to be really something. It's from the same people who are bringing us the WWE production. So you can see also the same folks who are, you know, bringing us the Kardashians. This is supposedly going to feature Mormon women who are so-called swingers here. And this has really garnered a lot of attention. You know, Hulu has brought forth a number of docu-series which have been somewhat critical, I would say, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For instance, Mormon No More, and also I believe Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey was brought by Hulu, and Under the Banner of Heaven. You know, Hulu just keeps going back to the well here of finding controversy surrounding the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, you know, the church has even had an official response to this particular docuseries, even though there's no trailer yet. We don't have a trailer, but it's apparently it's in pre-production here. And the church responds to this saying it is reinforcing harmful stereotypes in the media because, as we all know, very few Mormon women, almost none, are so-called swingers here, and that this is perpetuating unrealistic stereotypes. And this particular article here by Tad Welch really criticized Hulu for bringing in the last 21 months 3 different series which have been somewhat critical of the church here. This is going to be another big series here. Jana, what do you think about The Secret Lives of Mormon Women?
I want to just clarify that an opinion column that is in the Deseret News is not an official representation that has gone through all of the channels of the church. So, you know, Tad Welch wrote a very well done opinion column in the Deseret News about this, but I don't think that he would tell you that he was representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in his reaction. So just with that out of the way, what a bunch of hooey. You know, I just have to say, I think this is utterly ridiculous. I actually wrote about this yesterday for Religion News Service. And I mean, it's funny. But the fact that Hulu is doing this, yeah. Okay, so it's guilty pleasures time. You know, I love television, and I do watch a fair amount of TV. Some of which I watch when I'm doing something righteous, like walking on the treadmill, and some of which when I'm just lying there on the couch and doing absolutely nothing. And when I had COVID a couple of years ago, a good friend recommended that I should watch The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which was a very interesting exercise. You know, I don't think that anybody imagines that those are actually representative women of Salt Lake City. The series did manage to raise a few interesting questions, possibly about the way that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is changing. And I find those really interesting as a researcher. But this whole idea about Mormon swingers as though that is somehow typical is basically insane.
You also brought up in your article, in your piece in the Religion News Service, Jana, also I left one off, and that's Daughters of the Cult, which was just released by Hulu as well, which follows the aftermath of Ervil LeBaron, the so-called Mormon Manson. You know, Hulu keeps going back to these because they keep getting a lot of eyeballs, Rebecca. And is this reinforcing stereotypes, or is this trying to be salacious on purpose?
Well, I mean, it's not typical, but it is real. Everything they're covering. I mean, as I understand it, this series is going to be in Utah County, and I do have I do have knowledge that this does exist. You have to make sure that when you're shopping, you do not pick a pineapple and put it in your cart. It means something you probably aren't aware of. So these are all real scenarios. But again, it makes for good TV. People don't just want to watch someone living a regular life. They do want to watch someone who escaped from a cult, or who's a swinger in Utah County, or, you know, who's a real housewife, glamorous and very wealthy. That is what people want to watch across the board. Any religion, any demographic, they want to watch the more sensational kind of a story. There do seem to be a lot of unusual stories that happen within that demographic. I've had several very newsworthy stories right within my ward boundaries, you know, things that ended up on 60 Minutes and things like that. So things do happen. And of course, the media is there to pick up on those and bring them to the viewers. And there's certainly no lack of people that want to watch this. So we'll have to see. Maybe I'll see some of my neighbors in the video.
Maybe so. Jana, you'll have to forgive me, and Rebecca as well. You mentioned the pineapples. I guess I don't understand. What is if you buy a pineapple, what does that tell? What does that say about you?
It just means that you might be open to some alternative kind of activities. So, yeah.
Well, the way that I found out about that, the pineapple apparently has to be upside down in order for it to be a signal to other swingers that you are open for business. The way I found out about it was watching a cruise video. I like cruising, I like travel. And she was saying that one of the news stories recently in the cruise industry was that one of the passengers on a ship went around and put magnets that were upside down pineapples on random passengers' doors. So they were getting knocked on, you know, people knocking on their door, expecting something, and then like a 5-year-old would answer. Anyway, very, very bad news for those people. And I think as long as people understand that that is a very tiny minority of Latter-day Saints, then whatevs.
You know, there's so many ridiculous docuseries out there. I kind of put together my own list of potential Mormon-related docuseries that, you know, maybe I can put together a screenplay sometime or a pitch. And I thought I could get y'all's opinions on them. Maybe they're good. Maybe they're absolutely terrible. And that does remind me that our Mormon News Roundup, we premiere it every single Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you come on over to YouTube at that time, you can interact with your humble hosts. And I thought I could pitch this idea past both of you on what would be a potential good LDS related docu-series titles. And this is our tongue-in-cheek poll here, Jana, and we're hoping that you could be the first person to take our poll. And what's your choice number one, Jana, if you wouldn't mind reading number one?
Murder among the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It doesn't really work, does it?
That does not roll off the tongue.
No. But it's accurate. It's accurate. It's what it needs to be changed to. So.
It conforms to the Associated Press style guide. That's important to you, I know, Jana. Or how about number two?
Think celestial.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a combination Barbie with President Nelson. We know Barbie grossed like $3 billion. If we could somehow combine those two together, I think we got a real docu-series on our hands. What do you think?
I think I'm not a fan.
Okay, that's not for everybody. Well, pass on number 2. No problem. It's not for everybody. Now, here's my number 3 suggestion. It could be good. It could not be good, but it's Rebecca, could you read that for us?
Yeah, number 3 is lazy learners and lax disciples gone wild. And I'm sure this is referring to, post-Mormons, people that have left Mormonism. And I think that is the stereotype, that everyone has gone wild. And I actually think you could probably find a lot of examples of that as people kind of, figure out where they're at. So yes, I think this would be legitimate.
This is what I've noticed, is that if you put any title of a series out there and you put Gone Wild on the bottom of it, it gets a lot more eyeballs. That's why I'm thinking that this could be a good docuseries title. That's just, it could be good, it could be bad. Or how about number 4?
Arrogant and unproductive connect with Heavenly Mother.
That could be, and we know Elder Rundlin, he doesn't really appreciate that particular journey. In my own mind, though, I always think, Heavenly Mother, for me, it always imagines Cate Blanchett. I don't know. That's how I look at it. I could be completely wrong, but this could be a good docuseries title. What do you think?
I would not be watching.
You're not watching. This is going to be a tough crowd. No problem, though. I got 10 choices for you. Hopefully, we can find one that you might like. How about number 5, which is Polygamy Revisited for the 100th time? Polygamy shows are big. You had Sister Wives with Cody Brown and all them. That's got to be a good series. What do you think?
Certainly, it is the evergreen topic, isn't it?
Yes, that's the 100th time. Maybe that doesn't work so well. How about number 6, Rebecca? Could you read that one for us?
Yes, I'm sorry. I made this one up. I apologize to everyone out there. My Little Factory, a coming of age story. Yes, I don't think we would watch this documentary.
This is a tough crowd. That's okay.
This would be on one of those pay-per-view kind of channels.
Okay. Elder Packer does look good in that pick on the right, though. That is a good pick of him. Maybe that's not the series for you. That's okay. I got a couple more choices for you. How about number 7, Jana?
Missionaries Unleashed and Untamed, a P-Day Gone Bad. We seem to have Gone Wild and Gone Bad as a theme here. I'm not sure what you were thinking when you created these or what was on your mind, but also in my story about the Hulu documentary, I used Mormon Women Gone Wild or something. There's something in the air here.
Yes, there is. I'm trying to get eyeballs here because, if you think back to the church's official movie, like 2014, the Meet the Mormons in 2014, that only grossed less than $10 million. So if we're trying to get eyeballs, we're going to have to go to the well. And I can't think of anything better than Going Wild, Going Bad.
Okay, number 8 is A Little More Musket Fire, One Man's Call to Arms. And I'm sorry, I also made this one up. But I don't know that I'd watch that either now that I thought of the title. No,
This is a very tough crowd. That's okay, Jana. What about number 9? Can you read that one for us?
The Life and Times of a Decorated Religion News Service Journalist. I don't know who you're talking about, but
I would watch that one. That's the one that sounds interesting.
Oh, it's I have a very boring life. I did think of one, though. You had asked me, what would be a docuseries that I would watch. And here is one. I want to know all of those Utah babies that were given absolutely crazy names. What happens to them? Like, to follow them as a docuseries, I want to see them, dealing with this. Are they bullied on the playground? Do they actually find a mate? Are they standing in court 21 years later trying to get their name changed legally? That's what I want to know.
Very nice. We added number 10 in there for you. Utah babies and their crazy names. That does take us. For those of you in the live chat, if you could cast your vote, this was a tough crowd, tough poll. I get it. But Jana, could you be the first person to take our poll? Which of these selections do you think could be the next Hulu sensation?
Oh, my gosh. The next Hulu sensation. That's a lot. Probably Hulu viewers would want your Missionaries Unleashed and Untamed, a P-Day Gone Bad. I don't think I'd be interested, but I think a lot of people would be interested in that.
And Rebecca, if you could be the second person to take our poll, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Jana on that. Having a missionary myself, I know sometimes what he describes he does on P-Day. I'm like, what? Is that okay? But I love the baby names one. That is brilliant. When you have someone named McKinsley Lely spelled with an X, what do they do when they're 75? I don't know.
I don't know.
I think that's
I don't
brilliant.
know. It's a whole new frontier for those poor people.
It is. Every name has an X now in Utah, even if it's silent or not.
Very nice. That does take us to our final segment, and we appreciate your patience on that one, Jana. Our final segment is the Mormon News Roundup Joke of the Week. We'll ask all of our co-hosts to tell us a Mormon joke.
So I actually brought 2 because I'm just sure you've heard at least one of these before. And I've been thinking a lot about comparative religion this week. So both of these are drawn from the world of comparative religion. One of them is, we've been talking about Catholicism on this podcast. One of them is that Catholics teach that the Pope is infallible, but no Catholics ever behave as though they believe it. And on the other hand, Mormons explicitly teach that the prophet is not infallible, and yet no Mormons ever act like they believe it. Which,
very true.
Yeah, that's an old one, but it just keeps coming up again and again. I told a joke once to my boss at that time, who was an Orthodox Jew, and it was the old standard, how do you know that you're at a Mormon wedding? And it's that the bride's mother is pregnant, right? And so then she one-upped me, and she said, no, I can do better than that. How do you know that you are at a conservative wedding? It's that the bride is pregnant. How do you know that you're at an Orthodox wedding? It's that the bride's mother is pregnant. How do you know that you are at a Reform wedding? The rabbi is pregnant.
Wow.
Like that. That's good.
Very nice,
I have not
Jana.
heard that.
Thanks so much for coming on the Mormon News Roundup. You're probably best known for your book, The Next Mormons, which is available on the Oxford Press, and also for The Story of You. This is a workbook that was put out by Harper One in 2022. Jana, what projects are you working on, and how can people get in touch with you?
So The Story of You is actually by Ian Morgan Cron. I just wrote the study guide that accompanies it. So that's what you see. But if you're interested in the Enneagram, I really recommend Ian's books. I'm his editor, so I'm a little bit biased, but I think they're great. So The Road Back to You and The Story of You. And then as far as what I'm working on now, it is the book about people who are liminal, sort of hanging on in the church, but don't always agree with everything in the church, and then people who have left the church. And I'm doing that with my research partner, Benjamin Knoll, who's a quantitative research scientist.
Well, once again, thanks so much for coming on the Mormon News Roundup. We release new episodes live every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you come on over to YouTube at that time, you can interact with your humble host at that time. We also release new episodes of the Mormon movie reviews every Monday night. And tomorrow night, we're reviewing that old classic, That Which Was Lost, 1969. This is a watch party where we look at old LDS classics, and we really appreciate that. I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma on Bandcamp.com for this for the music that goes along with this episode. And thanks so much for ruminating with us on the Great and Spacious Beehive, Jana. And remember,
no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.